And so, which is fair enough. Under that context, um, the answer of should we have humanitarian intervention is very clear.
Mhm.
But and this is something that I've been frustrated with when it comes to like the reporting or the discussion of it, is you often hear, or they're often discussed in very blanket terms, like
Right.
the insurgents, the rebels, the militants, and they're given one-dimensional terms and one-dimensional names like that, and
Right.
you just and if you sort of close your eyes and imagine the scene, it's that white Toyota pickup, guy standing in the bed of the truck with an AK-47. He's got a whatever bandana or something like that, and then you cut to the refugee camp, and then it's the little kid with mosquitoes around his eyes,
Right.
and people hurtling around one area while a UN worker hands out rice and water bottles and what have you. And that's sort of the image that I've seen a million times and described a million times. And that's true, because and that's well and good, because those are realistic examples. But I think just discussing should we have humanitarian intervention, yes or no, I don't think it really takes into account, like, well, how did it get this bad? Well, who are these bad guys? Well, who wakes up in the morning, puts on, hops in the back of a Toyota truck and starts shooting at people? Like, these behaviors are so odd, and they're so against our shared humanity. We all
Right.
want to live in peace. No one wants to get shot. No one wants to, run for their lives. So I feel like, to ask the question of should we go into Sudan? Should we go into Yemen? We can have these conversations, but like, how did it get this bad? And why?
Right.
And like, maybe I'm stupid, but like, have we even tried calling the bad guys? Like, I know that sounds like a 5-year-old thing to say, but like, does ISIS have a phone number? Like, do we have diplomatic relations and even on a bare sense with these organizations? Like, can we get, what I'm imagining during the Cold War, the American president and the Russian president, they have the red phone. You know what I mean? So you can get to Moscow, you can get to Washington in 1 second. Like, does that type of communication exist? Like, I realize
Right.
I'm getting a little Hollywood here,
No.
you know, but
So speaking to Rambo here. Rambo
yeah,
movie.
right. So
Sorry, yeah,
but
go ahead.
I'm curious. Like, it's like, okay, like the ISIS is attacking the Yazidis, so let's help the Yazidis. That's a very simple, but like, why are they attacking? How are they attacking? Like, so yeah. So I think, like, starting out with should we have humanitarian intervention, yes or no, distracts from the larger conversation. And what do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I think the UN has tried to answer sort of this the UN has had a problem from the very get-go of how to define what counts as intervention.
Mm-hmm.
As I said, from their perspective, they said it's only when either minorities are there's a mass killing of minorities, and those that minority is unable to protect itself, whether the state is unable to give them the protection, or it's the state that's doing the killing of those minorities or peoples themselves.
Mm-hmm.
I could argue, right now we have the issue in China with the Uyghurs,
Yes.
the Uyghur Muslims. We could say that counts to me, counts as a genocide from all the information, despite
Yeah.
all the lack of information that comes. The information that we are having, I would say that counts as a genocide. You're trying to erase a group of people, whether that's culturally, physically as well.
Yes.
And so the UN has a very big issue with that, because one, it's running into a problem that the Organization of African Unity ran into once upon a time, which was you're trying to protect the sovereignty of each country, right? So that's in part of its mandate. It's trying to protect the sovereignty of each country, trying to keep its independence. On the other hand, you're also trying to advance a peace, trying to avoid what the UN came about in the very first place, which was to basically stop us from killing each other, from another world war, from World War III.
Yes.
And I think it was Dag Hammarskjöld. He was the former Secretary General in the 1950s for the UN. And he once said, "Is the UN was not created to take us to heaven, but it was created to stop us from going to hell, basically.
Mhm.
And in many ways, that's how I tend to think about the humanitarian intervention. Is at some point we have to we have to draw a line, like what counts as like mass atrocities, what counts as like mass killings.
Mhm.
And I would say the sadly all the examples we've had in the world uh have met that threshold. Now the
Yeah.
problem that we have is that there's global interest, and then there are national interests. And so I don't know, and this is where I think the limit of international law or international powers comes into, because as much as I would like to say that all of us agree on certain points, there are also national interests. And what the US, again, what we've seen on the P5, the five permanent members of the UN, is that they act in their own interest with exactly how they use the veto power. And so
Okay.
this is where I don't know what the answer is. I don't know what the alternative is, because it just seems as if all of the institutions that we do have that should hold people accountable, that should stop us from going to hell, as Dag Hammarskjöld said, just have not met that threshold. And I think primarily also it's also because the nature of war itself has changed. As you were saying, back in the days when, during the Cold War, the US could have like a diplomatic channel to, I don't know, somewhere within the USSR. Those the UN could facilitate those conversations. That is what the UN is exactly there to do, to facilitate diplomatic discussions with people. But then how do you do diplomacy with a people who permanently, like, we're talking about religion, right? We're talking about things like identity. We're talking about things that for other people, this goes beyond just like, oh, I want to create a state. I'm trying to rid the world of a certain group of people because I don't agree with them fundamentally. And so how do you change that? How do you create a diplomatic channel with a group like ISIS and accept it? I don't know how that becomes, because for them it's not necessarily about any ideology. The ideology is like, we are here to create a state for Muslims,
Yes.
and they don't care whether you're Christian or whatever other minority, they will take you out. And so how do you talk to people that way?
Yeah.
But, and I think you bring up a great point. I think when we discuss it just purely towards just the militaristic angle, it takes
Mhm.
out the discussion on how we got to that very point in the very first place.
Yeah.
We don't discuss things like how do they get the weapons? How are they able to acquire weapons that are able to kill people at such a scale?
Mhm.
The United States and Canada sells weapons to Saudi Arabia. Those weapons end up into the hands of terrorists, and those weapons gets sold on the black market.
Yeah.
It's not a secret of how these things kind of happen.
Right.
So it brings back to the question, like, to me, and I think this is the fundamental question is, are we willing to fund peace?
Mhm.
Because we are so quickly ready to go to war, but only specific wars. And this is the problem with humanitarian intervention. We only go to specific ones that have our interests. For example, I would say a place like Congo. Again, we brought up the Uyghurs. I could bring up in the Congo, where women, children, men are being slaughtered, raped, killed, and this has been going on for a long period of time. And while the UN has the largest peacekeeping force there, they're literally there to just overlook and oversee, and they themselves are even implicated in some of the things that are happening in the
Right.
Congo.
Right.
So what's
Yeah.
the point of having a peacekeeping mission if you can't even intervene militarily into a mass atrocity that's happening right under your eyes? Literally, some of the killings happen when there's a UN post.
Yes.
Literally, a few meters away, people have been slaughtered in the middle of the night. How does that happen? And
Yeah.
so to me it becomes, are we really interested in peace, or are we just really interested in appearing that we want peace? And this is the problem with the UN, because it talks about wanting peace, right? Creating peace, not bringing the world to hell. But hell is around us, and I see only people who are interested in intervening in Libya because Libya has oil. when
Right.
Libya, I would have said the things that were happening in Libya to me were not equal to what is happening to the Uyghurs today or is happening in the Congo. Why is it that Libya was allowed, they were allowed to go and intervene in Libya, but not allowed to intervene in Congo?
Yes. No, that's, I
Mm.
think if we start asking that question, you know, if we, yeah, if there is a specific, oh, okay, if after 5,000 people of any specific ethnic group are killed, then it's ethnic cleansing. Then it's like, well, by that definition, we should be in Mexico. By that definition, we
Yeah.
should be in Sudan. By
Yeah.
that definition, we should be along, you know what I mean? Like we'd be in 50 countries if that was
Yeah.
the definition. So
Mm.
clearly there is a, you know, some countries, but not others. And, you know, we all know the story about natural resources and whatnot.
Yeah.
But